The text came at 11:47 p.m. The blue glow of my phone cutting through the darkness of my bedroom. Don't come to Lily's wedding. Her in-laws are elite. You'd only embarrass us. No greeting, no softening. Just my mother's words, sharp as broken glass, telling me I wasn't good enough to stand in the same room as my own sister. I read it 3 times. Each time the letters blurred a little more. For 29 years, I had been the invisible daughter, the one who paid their debts in silence, who funded dreams I was never thanked for, who built an empire while my family still believed I was struggling somewhere in California. They didn't know, none of them knew, not my mother, not my perfect sister, not even the billionaire CEO whose son was about to marry into our family, but they would. In 3 days when I walked through those doors uninvited, the man they worshipped would see my face and everything they believed about me would shatter. Have you ever been satisfied by the people who should have loved you most? My name is Monica Jennings. I'm 35 years old, a senior partner at Westbrook Capital, one of the most respected private equity firms in San Francisco. I've spent the last 13 years turning struggling companies into success stories, making decisions that move hundreds of millions of dollars, building a career that most people only dream about. And none of it matters to the people who share my blood. I set my phone face down on the coffee table and walked to the window. The city spread out below me, a glittering maze of lights and possibility. I had worked so hard to get here. A corner apartment in Russian Hill with floor-to-ceiling windows. A view that cost more per month than my mother's annual mortgage payment. A life I had built with my own hands brick by brick while everyone I grew up with looked the other way. My father died when I was 6 years old. That's the first thing you need to understand about my family. Everything begins and ends with his absence. My mother told me he left nothing behind but debt and grief. No savings, no inheritance, no family to take us in. He had been raised in foster care, she said. Married young, died young. There was no one to contradict her story. No grandparents to visit on holidays. No aunts or uncles to send birthday cards. Just my mother's version of events repeated so often, it became the only truth I knew. 2 years after he died, my mother married Richard. He was a bookkeeper, steady, quiet, and utterly uninterested in the daughter his new wife brought into the marriage. I was 8 years old, still sleeping with the light on, still waiting for someone to tell me things would be okay. No one ever did. And then Lily was born, and suddenly there was no room left for waiting. Lily was the fresh start, the golden child, the daughter of the new beginning. She had Richard's last name and my mother's full attention. I had my father's eyes and a bedroom at the end of the hall that everyone seemed to forget existed. I learned early that no one was coming to save me, so I saved myself. I studied harder than anyone in my class. I won a full scholarship to Stanford when my mother said we couldn't afford college. I landed a job at Goldman Sachs while Lily was still picking out prom dresses. And somewhere along the way, I started sending money home, not because they asked, but because I thought that's what family meant. I paid off my mother's credit card debt 3 years ago. $12,000 transferred without ceremony. She never said thank you. She never mentioned it at all. I funded Lily's first year at a private university through an educational trust, $45,000 that my mother told Lily came from her own savings. I loaned Richard $30,000 to open his hardware store, interest-free. He told his wife a bank approved him for a small business loan. I never corrected the record. I didn't keep score. I didn't expect gratitude. I just kept giving, kept succeeding, kept building something extraordinary while my family remained convinced I was barely scraping by in California. Every phone call home lasted exactly 5 minutes before my mother pivoted to Lily's engagement, Lily's wedding plans, Lily's wonderful future with the Harrison family. The Harrisons. That name sat heavy in my chest as I turned away from the window and opened my laptop. I navigated to a folder I hadn't touched in months and clicked on a file labeled Harrison Group Investment Summary. 5 years ago, Harrison Group was 48 hours from bankruptcy. Banks had abandoned them. Investors had fled. And I had seen something no one else saw: a company worth saving. I was the one who saved it. William Harrison, the patriarch, the CEO, the man my family worshipped from afar. He had spent 5 years trying to find out who pulled his empire back from the edge. He just found out it was me. The knowledge sat with me through the night, heavy and strange. William Harrison knew my name now. After 5 years of wondering who had saved his company from ruin, He had traced the deal back to Bayview Holdings, then to Westbrook Capital, and finally to me. I wondered what he thought when he made the connection. I wondered if he had looked at the wedding guest list, seen Monica Jennings listed as the bride's sister, and felt the same disbelief I felt every time my mother pretended I didn't exist. I didn't have to wonder long. The next morning, my phone rang with a number I recognized instantly. My mother. I let it ring 3 times before answering, already bracing myself for whatever new wound she planned to inflict. Her voice came through thick with false concern, the kind of worry that isn't really worry at all, but something else entirely. "Monica, I'm glad I caught you. I need you to understand something about this weekend." She paused, waiting for me to ask what. I didn't, so she continued anyway. "The Harrisons aren't like us. They know senators. They vacation in Europe. They move in circles that you and I can't even imagine. William Harrison built his company from nothing, and now his son is marrying our Lily. Our Lily, not your sister. Our Lily. As if she belonged to everyone except me. I'm telling you this because I care about you," my mother continued. "You're single. You don't have an obvious career. No connections that anyone can see. If you show up at this wedding, the Harrisons are going to look at you and wonder what's wrong with our family. They're going to ask questions. And I don't want Lily's big day ruined because people are whispering about her strange older sister who couldn't get her life together." I held the phone away from my ear and stared at it for a moment, marveling at how easily cruelty flowed from her mouth, disguised as maternal concern. She actually believed she was being kind, or maybe she didn't believe it at all. Maybe she just needed to believe it so she could sleep at night. "Monica, are you listening?" "I'm listening," I said quietly. "Good, then you understand why it's better if you just stay home. Your father would have understood. He always knew when to step back and let others shine." The line went dead before I could respond. She had hung up on me, and she had used my dead father as her closing argument. The man who died when I was 6 years old, who I barely remembered, whose face I only knew from a single photograph I kept hidden in my dresser drawer. She invoked him like a weapon, like a ghost she could summon whenever she needed to remind me of my place. I set the phone down and stared at the wall. My father would have understood. What did that even mean? That he would have agreed I was an embarrassment, that he would have told me to stay away from my own sister's wedding. I would never know what my father would have thought about anything because he was gone, and my mother had spent 29 years making sure I understood that his absence was somehow my burden to carry. 15 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Lily. Her voice was different from my mother's, sweeter, more careful. "Monica, hi. I know Mom just called you and I know she can be a little harsh sometimes. I just wanted to reach out and explain things from my perspective." "Go ahead," I said. "This wedding means everything to me. I've been planning it for over a year. The Harrisons have certain expectations, you know. They care so much about appearances, about how things look. And I just want everything to be perfect." "What exactly are you worried about, Lily?" She hesitated. The pause stretched on for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Then she spoke again, her voice smaller now, almost guilty. When I first started dating Brandon, his family asked about my background, about our family, and I may have painted a certain picture." "What kind of picture?" Another pause. "I told them you were struggling, living alone in California, working some job, nothing special. I said you probably couldn't afford to travel much, which is why they'd never met you. I didn't think it would matter. I didn't think you'd ever actually show up." I closed my eyes. There it was, the truth beneath all the polite excuses. Lily hadn't asked me to stay away because she was worried I would embarrass anyone. She asked me to stay away because she had lied about who I was. She had told the Harrisons that her sister was nobody. And now she was terrified that her nobody sister might walk through the door and prove her wrong. "So if I come to the wedding," I said slowly, "and the Harrisons see me, and they start asking questions about what I actually do for a living." "Please don't put me in that position," Lily whispered. "Please, this is my dream wedding. I don't want anything to ruin it." I wanted to ask her when she had decided I was something that could ruin things. I wanted to ask her if she remembered who paid for her college education, who made sure she had opportunities I never received. But I didn't ask any of those questions because I already knew the answers wouldn't matter. Lily had made her choice. She had chosen to build her happiness on a foundation of lies, and now she was asking me to stay invisible so those lies could survive. "I understand," I said, and I did. I understood more than she would ever know. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and checked my email. Most of it was work correspondence, the usual flood of documents and updates that came with managing a portfolio of investments worth more than my mother could comprehend. But one message stood out from the rest. The subject line read, "Personal request from William Harrison Sr." I opened it and read carefully. "Ms. Jennings, Mr. William Harrison Sr. requests a meeting at your earliest convenience regarding your role in the Bayview Holdings transaction. He recently confirmed your involvement and wishes to express his personal gratitude. He understands you may be attending the Harrison Jennings wedding this weekend and hopes to connect in person." I read it twice, then a third time. William Harrison wanted to meet me, not because I was Lily's sister, not because I was anyone's daughter or family obligation. He wanted to meet me because I was the person who had saved his company 5 years ago, and he had finally discovered my name. 2 different families were asking me 2 different questions. My family was asking me to disappear. William Harrison was asking me to step forward. I picked up my phone and called my assistant. "Clear my Saturday, I'm going to Napa." I paused thinking about the files buried in my office. "And pull the original Harrison Group documents. I want to review everything before the weekend." After I hung up, I walked to my bedroom and opened my closet. I didn't need anything fancy, just something simple, elegant, the kind of dress that didn't try to prove anything because it didn't have to. I thought about my mother's words. I thought about Lily's confession. I painted a certain picture. My sister had spent years telling the Harrisons that I was nothing. And in 3 days, I was going to walk through those wedding doors, and every lie she had ever told would crumble the moment William Harrison saw my face. I wasn't going to announce myself. I wasn't going to make a scene or demand recognition. I was simply going to exist. And sometimes that is enough to bring down everything built on a lie. The drive to Napa took just over an hour, but it felt like I was traveling between 2 different worlds. Behind me was the life I had built in San Francisco, the corner office with the view, the respective colleagues who knew exactly what I was capable of. Ahead of me was the life I had left behind, the family who saw me as an inconvenience, the sister who had erased me from her story entirely. I kept my hands steady on the wheel and my mind focused on the road. I was not going to this wedding to cause trouble. I was going because someone had finally asked the right question about who I was. The estate appeared through a row of ancient oak trees, its sprawling grounds manicured to perfection. Luxury cars lined the private road, and well-dressed guests moved across the lawn like figures in a painting. Everything about the venue whispered old money and careful taste. This was the world Lily had married into, the world she had lied her way into, and somewhere among these beautiful strangers was the man who had spent 5 years searching for me. I parked at the far end of the lot and checked my reflection one final time. Simple navy dress, small pearl earrings that had belonged to my father's mother, the only thing I had inherited from his side. No elaborate makeup or designer labels. I was not here to compete with anyone. I was here to exist, and that would be enough. The entrance to the main hall was flanked by enormous flower arrangements, white roses and hydrangeas spilling over crystal vases. A string quartet played something elegant near the doors. Guests mingled with champagne flutes, their laughter floating across the afternoon air. I stepped through the entrance and immediately felt the weight of curious glances. People noticed newcomers at events like this. They catalogued faces, made mental notes, wondered who belonged to whom. My mother saw me first. She was standing near the gift table, talking animatedly with a woman I didn't recognize, when her eyes swept toward the entrance and landed on my face. The color drained from her cheeks. Her mouth stopped moving mid-sentence. For a moment, she looked like someone had struck her. Richard noticed next. He was holding a glass of red wine near the bar, and when he followed my mother's frozen stare, he immediately became fascinated with the contents of his glass. He couldn't look at me. He couldn't look away from me, so he looked at nothing instead. Then Lily turned around. She was greeting guests near a display of engagement photos, her white dress flowing perfectly around her, her smile bright and practiced. When she saw me standing in the doorway, that smile collapsed. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked terrified. The kind of terror that comes when you realize the lie you've been living is about to fall apart in front of everyone who matters. My mother crossed the room with sharp, hurried steps. She grabbed my elbow and pulled me slightly aside. Her voice a harsh whisper. "What are you doing here? I told you not to come. We talked about this. I met her eyes without flinching. I was invited. By who? Her grip tightened on my arm. Lily didn't invite you. I certainly didn't invite you. Who would possibly? Before I could answer, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads turned toward the main entrance. The string quartet seemed to play a little softer. And then the doors opened wider and William Harrison walked in. I had seen photographs of him, of course. I had studied his company's financials, read interviews where he discussed his business philosophy, watched videos of him accepting industry awards. But none of that prepared me for the presence of the man himself. He was silver-haired and impeccably dressed, moving through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who had built empires and survived their near destruction. Guests naturally oriented toward him like flowers toward sunlight. People wanted to be near William Harrison. They wanted him to notice them. He scanned the room with practiced ease, nodding at familiar faces, accepting handshakes, and congratulations about his son's wedding. His eyes moved across the crowd methodically until they found me. And then he stopped. I watched his expression shift. The social politeness fell away, replaced by something genuine, recognition. He changed direction, immediately moving toward me with purpose, ignoring the guests who tried to catch his attention along the way. My mother's hand was still on my arm. Her voice came out strangled. "Do you know him, Monica? How do you know William Harrison?" I gently removed her hand from my elbow. "We've done business." William reached me before she could ask anything else. He extended both hands and clasped mine between them, a gesture I had seen him use only in photographs with world leaders and longtime partners. It was not the handshake of casual acquaintance. It was the greeting of profound respect. "Ms. Jennings." His voice was quiet, meant for me and those immediately nearby, but it carried weight that volume never could. 5 years I've wondered who believed in me when no one else would. My own brother refused to help when I needed it most. Banks that I'd worked with for decades laughed me out of their offices. Investors who had made fortunes because of me suddenly couldn't return my calls. He paused, and I could see the memory of that time still affecting him. The great William Harrison, brought to his knees by circumstance, abandoned by everyone he thought he could trust. "And then someone I'd never met saw something worth saving," he continued. "Someone looked at my company and saw potential instead of failure. Someone invested when everyone else was running away." His hands tightened around mine. "I finally know who you are, and I cannot thank you enough." My mother's face cycled through expressions I had never seen before. Confusion gave way to shock, and shock gave way to something darker, something that looked almost like fear. Lily stood frozen beside her fiancé, gripping his arms so tightly that he winced. Margaret Harrison approached with sharp curiosity. She was an elegant woman in her 60s, the kind of person who noticed everything and forgot nothing. "William, you know the bride's sister." William turned, still holding my hand. "Know her, Margaret. This is the woman who saved Harrison Group. Her firm handled the entire restructuring. She led the deal personally. If it weren't for Ms. Jennings, we would have lost everything my father built." He looked at Lily with polite confusion. "Lily, you never mentioned your sister was in private equity, or that she was connected to our family's recovery." I had no idea until my team finally traced the Bayview Holdings transaction back to Westbrook Capital last month. Lily opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She looked at me, then at her future mother-in-law, then back at me. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling, and she had no words to stop it. Margaret's eyes narrowed. I could see her remembering every conversation she'd had with Lily about family background, every description of the struggling older sister in California, every dismissive comment about Monica who couldn't get her life together. The lie didn't just crack. It shattered silently in the space between what Lily had said and what was now obviously true. I gently withdrew my hand from William's. I turned to my mother, who stood frozen, her mouth half open, no words forming. "I came because I was invited, Mom, by someone who actually wanted me here." I walked toward the reception area with my spine straight and my pace unhurried. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Behind me, I heard Margaret Harrison's voice, cold and quiet, and absolutely controlled. "Lily, we need to talk." The wedding would continue, the vows would be exchanged, the photographs would be taken, and the cake would be cut, and everyone would smile for the cameras. But something had broken in that moment that could not be fixed with champagne and celebration. The foundation of lies that Lily had built her future upon had started to collapse. And I hadn't said a single word to make it happen. I had simply walked through the door. The ceremony was beautiful. I sat in the back row and watched my sister marry into the Harrison family, watched her exchange vows with a man whose father had just shattered every lie she had told about me. Lily's voice trembled through her promises of love and honesty. I wondered if anyone else noticed the irony. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the guests erupted in applause. I clapped along with everyone else. This was still my sister's wedding, whatever else it had become. The reception moved to a covered pavilion overlooking the vineyard. Fairy lights hung from every beam. A live band played jazz standards while waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne and appetizers. I found a quiet spot near the edge of the celebration and watched the Harrison family navigate their new reality. Margaret had not stopped watching Lily since their conversation. Her smile never faltered, but her eyes had turned cold and calculating. William Harrison found me on a terrace away from the noise. The sun was setting over the valley, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. He stood beside me for a moment without speaking, both of us looking out at the rows of grapevines stretching toward the horizon. "I may have complicated things with your family, he said finally. "That wasn't my intention. I simply wanted to thank you properly. And I saw an opportunity." I shook my head. "You didn't create anything, Mr. Harrison. You just illuminated what was already there. The cracks in my family existed long before today. You just turned on the lights." He nodded slowly, accepting this. When my company was dying, I learned who my real friends were. The answer was almost no one. Partners I had known for 30 years suddenly couldn't return my calls. Family members who had built their wealth on my success decided I was too risky to be associated with. I spent months watching everyone I trusted walk away. He turned to face me. And then a stranger appeared. Someone I had never met, someone who had no reason to believe in me, looked at my company and saw something worth saving. Not for profit, because there were easier ways to make money. Not for recognition, because you hid your involvement for 5 years. You did it because you saw value that others missed. "That's my job," I said quietly. "Finding value in places others overlook." William smiled, and for the first time I saw warmth in his expression rather than formality. "No, Ms. Jennings, that's your character. There's a difference. Plenty of people in your profession would have let Harrison Group fail and picked over the remains. You chose to save it. That choice says everything about who you are." We stood in comfortable silence for another moment before he excused himself to attend to his hosting duties. I watched him walk back into the pavilion, this man who had searched for me for half a decade, just to say thank you. It was more acknowledgement than my own family had given me in 29 years. My mother found me in a garden alcove half an hour later. I had been expecting her. She approached with quick, angry steps. Her face flushed with something between fury and fear. When she spoke, her voice shook. "How could you humiliate us like this? Showing up uninvited, making a scene in front of everyone important, embarrassing Lily on her wedding day." I cut her off. I didn't make a scene. I walked through a door. William Harrison made a scene because he has spent 5 years trying to thank the person who saved his company from bankruptcy. "I'm sorry that person turned out to be me. You should have told us." Her voice rose higher. "We're your family. We had a right to know what you were doing, who you were becoming. Instead, you kept secrets and let us find out like this in front of strangers. When should I have told you?" I kept my voice level, refusing to match her hysteria. "During which 5-minute phone call before you switched the conversation to Lily, when you sent me a text message telling me not to come to my own sister's wedding, when you said I would embarrass the family just by existing. When exactly would have been the right moment, Mom?" She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The questions hung in the air between us, unanswerable. She had no defense because there was no defense. Every accusation she wanted to make crumbled against the reality of how she had treated me for decades. Finally, she retreated into wounded silence, the familiar tactic of a woman who had run out of arguments but refused to admit fault. She turned and walked away without another word. I let her go. Richard approached me later in the evening. He was holding a drink, and while he wasn't drunk, he had consumed enough liquid courage to loosen his tongue. He looked uncomfortable in his suit, tugging at his collar as he walked toward me. "Listen," he said, avoiding my eyes. "I want to apologize. I know I never treated you like a real daughter. I came into your life when you were 8 years old, and I never really tried to connect with you. That was wrong." I waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. He continued fumbling with his words. Your mother always said your father left nothing but problems. Debt and grief, that's how she described it. But you turned out more than fine. Better than any of us, really. You built something incredible all on your own. He laughed awkwardly, nervously. I guess that insurance money wouldn't have changed much anyway. You clearly didn't need it. I went completely still. What insurance money? Richard's face drained of color. He realized instantly that he had said something he shouldn't have. I watched him scramble for a way to take it back, but the words were already out. Nothing. Forget I said anything. I've had too much to drink. Richard? My voice was steady but hard. What insurance money are you talking about? He shook his head, rapidly backing away. It's nothing. Ancient history. I shouldn't have mentioned it. He retreated into the crowd before I could press further, but the damage was done. My father supposedly left nothing behind. No savings, no inheritance. Just debt that my mother had struggled to pay off. That was the story I had been told my entire life. But Richard had been the family bookkeeper back then. He had helped manage the finances after my father died. And he had just mentioned insurance money like it was common knowledge. Lily intercepted me as I was leaving. Her mascara was streaked, her voice breaking with barely controlled sobs. Please, Monica, you have to understand. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I stopped walking and faced her. What exactly did you tell them about me, Lily? I want to hear you say it. She looked at the ground, unable to meet my eyes. I said you were struggling, single, not really successful, nothing to be embarrassed by, just nothing special. Nothing special. My own sister, asked to describe me to her future family, had chosen those words. Nothing special. I was scared, she whispered. I thought if they knew you were successful, they would wonder why I wasn't. I just wanted to be the impressive one for once in my life. I absorbed this confession. My little sister had built her entire engagement on a lie because she couldn't bear the thought of standing next to someone more accomplished. She had erased me from her story so she could be the star. So you made me smaller, I said quietly, so you could feel bigger. Lily sobbed harder. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I stepped back from her. I'm not going to ruin your wedding night, Lily. What's done is done. But don't expect me to fix what happens next. You built this house of cards yourself. You'll have to figure out how to live in the wreckage. I walked to my car alone. The drive to my hotel wound through dark Napa roads, past vineyards sleeping under the stars, but I saw none of it. Richard's words kept echoing in my mind. Insurance money, her father's insurance money. If there was money and my mother took it, everything suddenly made sense. Why I was always pushed away. Why I was never quite good enough. Why my mother needed me to fail. I pulled over to the side of the road, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Tomorrow I was going to find out the truth, even if it burned everything to the ground. The forensic accountant's report arrived 3 months after the wedding. I had hired him the week I returned to San Francisco, giving him every detail I could remember about my father's death and the years that followed. He was thorough and expensive, but I needed to know the truth more than I needed the money. The findings changed everything I thought I understood about my family. My father had a $50,000 life insurance policy. I was listed as the sole beneficiary. After funeral expenses and outstanding debts were settled, approximately $18,000 remained. The money was placed in a UTMA custodial account with my mother, named as custodian, giving her legal access to manage the funds on my behalf until I reached adulthood. Bank records told the rest of the story. Withdrawals began within 6 months of my father's death and continued steadily for 12 years. New furniture after the remarriage. Richard's business startup costs. Application fees for Lily's private school. A family vacation to Florida that I was told we couldn't afford to include me on. Year after year, my mother withdrew my inheritance dollar by dollar and spent it on everyone except me. By the time I turned 18, when the account should have transferred to my control, the balance was $247. My mother never mentioned it. She simply let the account close and continued telling me that my father had left nothing but debt and heartbreak. The woman who called me an embarrassment had built her comfortable new life on money stolen from my future, and she had spent 29 years convincing me I was worthless, so she would never have to face what she had done. A year passed. The consequences of that wedding day rippled outward in ways I never orchestrated, but observed from a distance. Word spread through my mother's social circle about the revelation at the Harrison wedding. Not the inheritance, which I kept private, but the discovery that her struggling daughter actually controlled investments worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Friends who had praised my mother's parenting for years now whispered about what kind of mother produces a daughter who stays away. The narrative she had carefully constructed, the story of the difficult older child who couldn't get her life together, collapsed under the weight of obvious truth. She called me more frequently now. I answered perhaps one call in 3. The woman who once controlled every family story now waited for my permission to speak. Lily's marriage continued, but the foundation had cracked. Margaret Harrison maintained a polite coldness that Lily could not penetrate no matter how hard she tried. The Harrisons had built their fortune on trust and reputation, and Lily had proven herself willing to lie about fundamental things. Her husband began questioning what else she might have deceived him about. Lily spent her first year of marriage exhausting herself, trying to prove she was honest. Discovering how difficult it is to rebuild trust you have destroyed. Richard's hardware store struggled. The business connections that had once seemed like lucky breaks, the referrals that appeared from nowhere, the small investments that kept him afloat during difficult months, all of it stopped. He finally understood where that luck had originated, and he was too ashamed to ask for its return. He let go of 2 employees and moved to a smaller location. I felt no satisfaction watching him fail. I simply stopped preventing it. One evening I called my mother, not to fight, not to demand explanations, just to finish something that had been left incomplete for too long. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious and hopeful. "Monica, I'm so glad you called." "I know about Dad's insurance money," I said. Silence filled the line, then a shaky breath. "How did you find out?" "It doesn't matter how. What matters is that I know. You took $18,000 that was meant for my future. You spent it on furniture and vacations and Richard's business and Lily's school fees. And then you told me for 29 years that my father left nothing behind." She started to speak, to explain, to minimize, to redirect blame, the way she always did. I listened without interrupting, letting her exhaust every excuse. Then I spoke. "I'm not calling to punish you, Mom. I'm calling to tell you that I finally understand. You didn't push me away because I reminded you of Dad. You pushed me away because every time you looked at me, you saw what you stole. It was easier to convince yourself I was worthless than to admit you took something from someone who deserved it." More silence. I could hear her breathing, ragged and uneven. "I'm not going to sue you. I'm not going to tell Lily or Richard the full truth. But I need you to know that I know. And I need you to understand that any relationship we have going forward depends entirely on whether you can become someone worth knowing. I'm not waiting for you anymore. I'm not hoping you'll change. If you want to be part of my life, you'll have to earn it." I hung up gently. No shouting, no tears. Just a door closing that should have closed years ago. 1 year after the wedding, William Harrison hosted an industry dinner and introduced me to his network. Not as the bride's sister, not as anyone's daughter, as the investor who saw value when everyone else saw failure. I stood before a room of people who respected what I had built, requiring no apologies, no explanations, no footnotes about my family. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I found the photograph I kept hidden in my dresser. My father, barely 30 years old, holding a baby girl, his eyes full of hope for a future he would never see. I traced his face with my finger. "I made it, Dad," I whispered. "Not because of what you left me, but because of who I chose to become." 18 months after the wedding, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Lily standing in the hallway, thinner than I remembered, tired, wearing no designer clothes or perfect makeup. Just my sister, looking lost. "I'm not here because I need anything," she said quickly. "I've been in therapy for 6 months. My therapist says I can't heal until I face what I did to you." I leaned against the doorframe and waited. "I spent my whole life being the good one because you were gone," she continued, her voice cracking. "I didn't know anything about you, so I made things up. And somewhere along the way I started believing my own lies. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking if someday you'd be willing to actually know me. The real me, not the person Mom created." I studied this stranger who shared my blood. "I don't know who the real you is, Lily. I'm not sure you do either. I'm trying to find out." I didn't invite her in, but I didn't close the door. "Then keep trying. When you figure it out, come back. Not because you need something, but because you actually want a sister." She nodded, wiping her eyes. That's fair. She turned to leave, then stopped. Monica, I'm sorry, not because it helps me, because you deserved better. I watched her walk away. Then I closed the door softly. Not a slam, just a boundary held with grace. The city glittered below my window. I thought about the girl I had been. 6 years old at a grave, 18 years old walking onto a college campus alone, building empires while my family pretended I didn't exist. 35 years old, standing in my own home, answering to no one. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be chosen. I stopped waiting. I chose myself. Monica's story reminds us of something we often forget. Your worth is not determined by the people who fail to see it. Family can be the source of our deepest wounds, and sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stop waiting for love that was never freely given. If someone in your life makes you feel small so they can feel big, that is not love. That is control. You deserve relationships built on respect, not obligation. You deserve to be seen for who you truly are, not who others need you to be. Setting boundaries is not cruelty, it is survival. And choosing yourself after years of being overlooked is not selfish. It is necessary. Monica did not destroy her family. She simply stopped holding together what was already broken. She stopped sacrificing her peace for people who never appreciated the cost. If this story touched your heart, if you saw yourself in Monica's journey, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. We share new videos every week, filled with drama, strength, and the kind of justice that heals the soul. Leave a comment below and tell us, what would you have done in Monica's situation? Would you have walked through those doors? Would you have answered Lily's knock? Your voice matters to us, and we love hearing from you.